is Meg Applegate, the CEO and co-founder of Unsilenced. If you've not been to their booth in the exhibit hall, I encourage you to go. I encourage you to give. Their charity is a survivor-led advocacy group. They are one of the only survivor-led charities in the country. She herself is a survivor and has an incredible story to share. I hope you'll visit with her. She's going to have her chance to speak up here, but I wanted to acknowledge her specifically. I'm also pretty honored to have the senator here from Oregon. I don't know that there's a legislature anywhere in the country who's done more for the children in this industry, who's been boots on the ground. I flew to Oregon and met her for the first time a few months ago. She's so humble. She impressed me because not only does she know about this, but I think she's been to more of these facilities than certainly anybody I've ever talked to. She's physically been in the room. She's protected the children of Oregon, and it's very humbling to be on the stage with her. And the other panelists I have here, Brian Kent, we introduced ourselves, never met Brian before this MTMP, but I'd heard about some of the work he was doing, and it was so fascinating to me. I don't want to steal his thunder. I said, you need to come to MTMP, and I want you on my session because you need to tell folks what you're doing. We need to copy this around the country. This is a great way to attack this industry. And of course, Tommy James, I'm proud to call him a partner on these cases. We filed suits against the state of Alabama very recently for some of these cases. He's been in this space for a very long time. I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Meg to get started. I know she has a presentation for us, but I wanted to thank you for being here. Thank you for paying attention. And if you have any questions, these are the leaders of this field. Please make every effort to talk to them and pick them for their expertise. I'd also like to acknowledge we have some other survivors here with Unsilenced, and I just want to give them a great big hand for being here, for standing up and
Good afternoon. As Caleb said, my name is Meg Applegate. I am the co-founder and CEO of Unsilenced, and I'm also a survivor of institutional abuse. You're gonna have to bear with me. I'm extremely cold, so if I shiver, I'm really sorry. But Unsilenced is a nonprofit organization that serves the past, present, and future victims of institutional child abuse. Our mission is to stop institutional child abuse by empowering self-advocates to promote lasting social change. On the slide above, you'll find a QR code that will take you to all of my contact information should you have any questions or have a need to reach me after today. But before I dive into the ways that Unsilenced makes its impact and the industry that we're up against, I think it makes the most sense to start off with a little bit about me, my story, and why I care so much about this topic. When I was 15 years old, I was kidnapped from my bed in the middle of the night by two strangers. They told me that I was coming with them and that we can do this the easy way or the hard way. I chose the easy way, of course. They then forced me into the back of an SUV and drove off. This was effectively the end of my childhood because over the course of the next 3.5 years, I was abused in 2 different facilities that masqueraded as being my treatment. During this treatment, I experienced things like forced isolation and seclusion from society, incorrect diagnoses and forced medication, name-calling and belittlement in front of my peers, forced labor to the point of injury, medical neglect, the removal of food and essential items as punishment, and inappropriate physical and relationship dynamics between my therapists and myself. I left the programs completely brainwashed at the age of 18 and a half, and I didn't wake up to the abuse I experienced until I was 33 when one of my program sisters committed suicide. Because of these experiences, I now suffer from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, daily anxiety, panic attacks, dissociation, chronic health issues from the medical neglect, and insomnia. I wish I could say that my story isn't common, but it is. And there are hundreds of thousands of people out there with the same or similar story to mine, some of them sitting right here in this front row. My journey was one of suspense, survival, and a fight to reclaim my identity and voice from the clutches of what Unsilenced calls the troubled teen industry, or TTI, or the exploited teen industry. But instead of me explaining exactly what this industry is, I'm going to show you a short 5-minute movie that does a much better job at filling you in. You may be wondering, who is unsilenced? What is the troubled teen industry, and why should I care? Every year, thousands of children are sent against their will to troubled teen facilities, often ripped out of their beds in the middle of the night by strangers to be treated for various mental illnesses, addiction issues, and perceived behavioral problems. The troubled teen industry, or TTI, is a multi-billion-dollar industry comprised of a network of underregulated and powerful congregate care facilities that go by a myriad of names like therapeutic boarding schools, residential treatment centers, wilderness therapy programs, faith-based academies, and conversion therapy programs. They use tough love and other non-evidence-based interventions to reform youth struggling with mental health or educational challenges. These facilities use deceptive marketing to manipulate decision makers in communities into believing they are providers of therapeutic services for at-risk youth. By pathologizing normal teenage behaviors to scared and vulnerable caregivers, they convince them their teens are at risk of great harm. They then promise to fix an impossibly long list of issues using a one-size-fits-all approach that ends up causing more harm than good. Facilities within the TTI can cost caregivers anywhere from $5,000 to $30,000 a month, but the program affects far more families than those who can afford that hefty price tag. The industry also preys on disadvantaged youth by tapping into public funds to house migrant children and youth from foster care systems, juvenile justice systems, and school systems through IEPs. In fact, it's estimated that $23 billion of your tax dollars go toward funding these facilities annually. Many youth sent to facilities already have prior trauma histories, including adoption, parental divorce, abuse, or prior sexual assault, which are only exacerbated by extended separation from support systems and communities once placed in an institutional setting. The industry's historic lack of regulation, transparency, and accountability has led to a clear pattern of abuse spanning over the past 50 years. Instead of providing therapeutic services and education, young people often experience life-altering maltreatment, including forced labor, inadequate education, psychological harm, sexual and physical assault, neglect, civil rights violations, hospitalizations, and even death. To date, there have been over 350 documented youth who have died at the hands of this industry. Unfortunately, even in the absence of overt abuse in facilities, the act of being institutionalized itself can be harmful because the youth live under a total institution where they lose autonomy. Their contact with the outside world is restricted. They're unable to advocate for themselves, report abuse, and are forbidden to freely leave the facility for months to years, completely isolated from their community and families. This antiquated tough love approach of being removed from the home goes against what we know now. Youth with strong and cohesive relationships with family continue to experience mental health benefits, including lower levels of depressive symptoms until their late 30s. The research is clear. Forcing young people out of their communities, labeling them as the problem, and creating a residential melting pot of youth who are struggling and calling it treatment isn't working. It is actually causing harm. One study of youth with emotional and behavioral disorders illustrated how 60% of young people had a reduction of symptoms when treated within their communities, but only 11% had reductions of symptoms when treated in residential care. Many youth leaving TTI facilities grow up to struggle with trauma disorders, fractured familial relationships, and have difficulty obtaining further schooling or maximizing career opportunities due to their educational setbacks. Regardless of the name or location of facilities, many have patterns of rampant abuse, and the 120 to 200,000 children who attend them annually leave calling themselves survivors. At that rate, there is a high probability that someone you know has been to one. As more and more survivors emerge from this industry, they are beginning to speak out about their experiences. Unsilenced was founded by survivors and allies aiming to stop institutional child abuse in congregate care facilities. We envision a world where youth are free from institutionalization and the voices of young people are respected in the development of their mental, emotional, and physical well-being, serving past, present, and future survivors of this industry, we advocate for constructive alternatives that circumvent the troubled teen industry's programs by utilizing education, awareness, community support, and policy change. We strive to protect the civil, social, and human rights of youth. The abuse must stop, and it stops with us. We are unsilenced. Learn more about our fight for youth rights by visiting unsilenced.org. So before diving into the industry's incentives, long-term effects, and regulatory challenges, I want to reiterate the types of maltreatment that are prevalent in these programs. We're talking about inhumane and degrading discipline, dangerous seclusion and restraint methods, physical, medical, and nutritional neglect, sexual assault, harassment, and grooming, conversion and aversion therapies, forced medication, isolation, inability for youth to be able to report abuse, severe communication restrictions with parents, lawyers, and advocates, substandard psychotherapeutic interventions and by unqualified staff, food and sleep deprivation, and tragically, even death. And with insurance companies, states, and federal funds, and parents paying at a per day rate, it incentivizes programs to extend the care for as long as possible for the youth, increasing the likelihood that they'll have long-term damage in their lives. The exploited teen industry thrives on manipulation, and deceptive marketing, fear tactics, and pathologizing normal adolescent behaviors are its weapons of choice. Many programs employ misleading online quizzes to convince parents that their teens are troubled. Take Shepherd's Hill Academy, for instance, as you see over here. I took their 10-question quiz to find out, as a hypothetical parent, if I have a troubled teen. I marked every question that they asked as disagree to indicate that my child exhibited none of their so-called high-risk behaviors. But the results still indicate, and I quote here, "It sounds like your teenager is experiencing moderate to high levels of disobedience, anger, or risky behavior." It then suggested a 12-month residential program for a teen they have never met, and without asking any mental or physical health questions at all. This specific program, I have to add, has a track record of misconduct, including abuse, conversion therapy, and even operated without a license for over 10 years. Beyond quizzes, programs often use buzzwords like CBT, DBT, trauma-informed care, as a way to lure in parents into hasty decisions, painting a bleak picture for their child's future and promising miraculous solutions. This manipulation pushes parents to rush their choices, preventing them from conducting thorough research. It also falsely reassures parents that they're not alone and that the program is going to save their child. In truth, it's a facade that preys on vulnerability. When trying to determine how the abuse in these facilities will affect youth as they grow up, it's important to consider the concept of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. ACEs are potentially traumatic events that can happen before a child reaches the age of 18 that can interfere with their health, opportunities, and stability throughout life. Decades of research has been able to link higher ACEs scores to greater chances of developing chronic health issues, obesity, behavior changes, autoimmune diseases, depression, and alcoholism. Many trauma therapists even use this questionnaire to assess PTSD risks. What's most notable about the ACEs questionnaire is that the types of abuse that they inquire about are similar to the abuse that I just reported about going on in these programs. To illustrate my point further, if I would have taken the ACEs questionnaire at the age of 15 before I was sent away, I would have scored a 1 out of 10. But now, after my 3.5 years of treatment, I now score a 7 out of 10. Studies in adults show that higher ACEs scores are correlated with elevated morbidity and mortality rates. In fact, with an ACE score of 4 or more, my likelihood of developing chronic pulmonary lung disease increased 390%, hepatitis 240%, depression 460%, and attempted suicide 1,220%. The industry grapples with critical challenges in regard to reporting, regulation, and oversight. One major issue is the lack of uniform standards. Facilities operate under varying regulations or sometimes no regulations at all, which lead to significant disparities in practices and levels of care. Many facilities exploit loopholes in oversight and bypass mental health treatment regulations by labeling themselves as educational institutions or religious programs. To further complicate things, licensing requirements vary significantly across states, with some having minimal or no specific requirements at all. And finally, insufficient reporting mechanisms deter youth from reporting abuse at all due to the fear of retaliation and limited access to the proper communication channels. Accurately tracking the number of children entering this industry is a significant challenge. Data on these placements rely on the Interstate Compact on the Placement of Children, or ICPC, which is an agreement between all 50 states to ensure safe out-of-state placement for children. And it applies to children in state custody, those being adopted, and those being placed in residential care by parents or guardians. However, obtaining this data involves doing a record request from each state individually, and the timelines vary in responses when we get them. Complicating things further, states differ in their data tracking systems. Some are centralized and others are decentralized. For instance, if I wanted to know how many children were being sent through the school districts to receive data for educational placements in California, I would need to request ICPC data from both the Department of Social Services and the Department of Education. But in other states, it could be many more agencies than that. And the data, as I said, comes back on varied timelines every time. These barriers make it nearly impossible to maintain accurate data on youth placement in this industry. And as we examine the nation's landscape of placements, we observe a distinct division between send-out states that you can see here in orange and historically receiving states that you'll see here in purple based on the level of regulations in each state, with the states that have the least amount of regulations having more programs. The division raises questions about the disparities in oversight and how it might impact the well-being of youth and out-of-state placements if the reason more programs are in that state is solely because their laws don't protect children as much as the sending state. All these systemic challenges regarding regulation, reporting, oversight, and the tracking of youth placements highlight the need for comprehensive reform within this industry. Unsilenced aims to stop institutional child abuse and empower survivors, and we do so in the following ways. But today I'm going to focus on how we help survivors, their families, and law firms with the legal advocacy work that we do. Ensuring survivors have access to legal support is a crucial, unaddressed need in the fight for youth rights for the following reasons. Many survivors leave these programs without knowing their legal rights or whether the abuse that they experienced was against the law or not. It also provides survivors with validation for their trauma. It enables them to share their stories, challenge program credibility, and raise awareness about industry flaws. And finally, legal actions against these programs can foster accountability and potentially drive systemic reform. Our efforts to connect survivors with legal support began with our attorney database. And last year, we were here telling you about that attorney database, and it's been an enormous success. The database was designed to connect survivors of institutional abuse with attorneys who may be able to provide services and connect attorneys who are searching for co-counsel. Over the last 5 months, we have added 31 attorneys within 14 law firms to the database located all over the United States. Historically, accountability and program closures have rarely stemmed from authorities, and litigation has proven to be effective in bringing about change, especially in cases involving severe abuse or fatalities. And recent trends show a significant increase in litigation against this industry, and with this awareness, we see it yielding positive results in accountability. Excuse me. One of these positive results is in the case of Taylor Goodridge at Diamond Ranch Academy, or DRA. Taylor died at Diamond Ranch Academy in Hurricane, Utah on December 20th, 2022 at the age of 17 from what the media reported as a sudden death. I made a TikTok video to tell the community about this death and to also express the doubt on the cause of death that they stated. I said that my guess is that she had some kind of underlying medical condition that was ignored. 2 things happened from that TikTok that I didn't expect. First, the video went viral, which prompted firsthand witnesses to reach out to me and confirm that I was correct. Taylor had been sick for weeks and denied medical care. Then, the video reached Taylor's family, and they reached out and asked for my help. These two things led to Taylor's family discovering the truth about what happened to Taylor, which contradicted what DRA had told them, and me discovering discrepancies in what was reported by DRA to Taylor's family regarding the timeline of her death. We then connected the Goodridges to Alan Mortensen, who they engaged as their attorney, and over the next several months, Alan, Unsilenced, myself, Taylor's family, and the entire survivor community worked tirelessly and to propel this case forward and hold DRA accountable to find justice for Taylor. While this work is certainly not over as far as the case goes, I'm proud to report that our collective efforts paid off because Diamond Ranch Academy closed its doors in August, 8 months after Taylor's death. DRA operated for 19 years and 3 children died in their program. It was one of those wins that just tells you what you're doing is working. This victory showcases Unsilenced potential in collaboration with law firms. And we become a trusted advocacy organization. And we have evolved our legal advocacy efforts through partnerships with law firms and the lessons learned from the Taylor Goodridge case. And so here's how a partnership with Unsilenced was able to help with the Goodridge case and can help your firms as part of our attorney database. We developed an experience survey that gathers information from survivors and employees about the program. This allows us to assess potential abuse patterns, collect employee names or incidences, and better understand facility environments to help direct investigations. This led to crucial witnesses and evidence being obtained in the Goodridge case. We have an extensive network of over 40,000 survivors that allows us to mobilize and facilitate collective actions, have a targeted audience to distribute the experience surveys to, and quickly find survivors of institutional abuse who are interested in joining cases to hold their program accountable. And with our industry expertise, we have a deep knowledge of these programs. We understand their operations, vulnerabilities, and tactics of concealing abuse. We also offer invaluable support to both the families and the survivors. We expose programs and its bad actors, provide case updates and attract potential witnesses, and generate negative publicity for these programs through our social media accounts and network of media contacts. And finally, we offer investigative support in writing record requests to support cases and promote transparency to the public. When I told Alan Mortensen that I was going to be giving this presentation today, he told me that he wanted to provide a quote to help everyone understand how positive his experience was in working with us. So I'm going to give you a second to read that. So above you're going to find 3 QR codes. The first is to apply to be a part of our attorney database. The second is to donate to Unsilenced. We are a 501c3 that relies on the generous donations of people like you who believe in our mission. And third is to check out our website that has much more information about us and this industry. And also, please be sure, as Caleb said, to stop by our booth. Thank you.
I want to mention real quickly, would all the Unsilenced folks stand up real quick and look out at the audience for me? These people are amazing. They're in the exhibit hall. Please go speak to them. They have incredible stories to tell. What they are doing for survivors, for the children that have been through this facility, as each of them has, and the children that are going to them now, is truly incredible. Let's give them a huge round of applause. When you're doing these cases, their website is often the first stop that I make now. When we're evaluating a case, the database, if you're doing anything in this space, you need to go to their website. It's free. The documents they have, the testimonials they have, the evidence that they have collected is a true treasure trove, and no litigation should start without going there first. And Meg has always been a phone call away, a text message away, and she will be quick to tell me when I do something wrong, which I greatly appreciate. She is very passionate about this program, very passionate about these survivors, and I'm very proud to have partnered with you and proud to have her speaking to you today. This next guest, the Senator is an incredible advocate as well. When I met her out in Oregon and found out how many facilities she had been to all over the country herself, that she herself, as a sitting senator, flew to these facilities where Oregon was sending children to inspect them, and actually had to tell other states, hey, you've got kids in this hellhole, and they didn't know that they were there, that they had just forgotten that, or were unaware that they had sent children to some of the most abysmal facilities that you could possibly imagine. And these children were in the state's custody. These children were the wards of the state. They were the most vulnerable, and they were at a awful, truly terrible facility that the senator went to. And she was the one that told some other state, hey, you've got kids here. These are the conditions that they're suffering through. I'm honored and humbled to have you here, Senator. Let's give her a big round of applause.
Thank you so much, Caleb, and thank you, Meg, for that presentation and all the work, and to the survivors that are here. And that is really where the attention to this has come from. I think it's important to remember that kids, many of whom are now older than I am, have been telling us what's happening in these places for decades. Some of them are no longer with us because they have died. Some of them are really struggling, and some of them are working really hard to turn this over. I first became aware of this issue in 2019 when I got a telephone call from a reporter who wanted to know why the state of Oregon was sending about 100 kids to out-of-state programs. And at first I thought, well, our mental health system isn't working really well. These must be highly specialized, very important facilities that Oregon does not have the resources to offer. And in fact, that is what the Department of Human Services told me was happening. But what I did after that was ask, well, what are the facilities? I want to know what they are. And they didn't want to tell me. And so I started trying to figure it out, and eventually this reporter had someone leak to her the list of where kids were located. She emailed it to me. I was sitting actually in the Senate Education Committee, and I'm very impatient. So I Googled it, and the first thing that came up was one of these facilities in Iowa, Clarinda Academy. It had a bunch of Washington kids that had just gotten pulled out because they were being significantly abused. So I immediately reached out to the Department of Human Services and said, hey, why do we have kids in this place where they're being abused? And they said, we went and checked it out, and they aren't abusing the Oregon kids. And I said, that makes no sense. That makes no sense. You don't walk up to a kid and say, are you an Oregonian or are you from Indiana? Because if you're from Indiana, we're going to put you in a seclusion room and a 6-person restraint. But if you're from Oregon, we're going to give you a cookie. Do you want a snickerdoodle or a chocolate chip? I mean, there's so much about this that just makes no sense. And so from that point on, this reporter and I started doing public records requests. And I held hearings every week, twice a week, where we sought updates on what was happening. And as it unfolded, it was like Game of Thrones, where if you've seen Game of Thrones, people who have seen the White Walkers, they can't turn away and everybody else thinks they've lost their minds. That's what this was, because I would go to my colleagues and say, this is an emergency, we need these kids home today. And they'd say, come on, Sarah, you're over-exaggerating, these aren't reliable sources, these kids don't know what they're talking about, you can't prove it. And so I decided I needed to go and see these programs. And before I could start traveling, there was a riot that broke out at Red Rock Canyon Academy in Salt Lake City, or St. George, Utah. It's one of the former Squel programs. Our state licensing entities had been out there in the weeks leading up to this, and in fact were there the day before and the day after, and they described it as a spa-like environment where the children were all very happy. You saw pictures there. That was the one of the kids with the broken blinds down in the prone restraints with their hands handcuffed behind their backs. All of the kids were handcuffed that day. One of the kids that I've gotten to know, his shoulder was broken. He didn't do anything wrong. He just happened to be there at the facility. It was the second time he'd been assaulted in the course of 2 weeks and needed medical attention. And although the people that assaulted him were charged with crimes, they had to drop the prosecution because he got sent back to Oregon and nobody would pay to bring him back to testify against these individuals, and therefore the charges were dropped. This happens over and over, and we now know that at that program that happened multiple times, and we know that some children that were sent there, girls, left with additional children in tow because they were impregnated by staff members who were there. When I started to travel, I'd made my first reservation and I got a telephone call from the new CEO of Squel Youth and Family Services. He says, "Hi, my name is Chris Russos. I'm the new executive director. I understand you have a problem with my company. I want to meet you." And he invited me to come visit a program, and it happened to be where I was going, so I didn't tell him I was going anyway and thought, well, I'll probably see more if I go with him. But I kept at the end of that trip just to compare an unannounced visit where they didn't know that I was coming. So we visited Clarinda, which there were issues. We visited another place, Forest Ridge Academy, that was there in Iowa, and from there I flew to Illinois. Now, at the places that I visited in Iowa, everybody was very friendly, the kids were very talkative, everything was very clean. One of the kids did tell me that they had cleaned all day before I came, so I really like honest kids. And I got in trouble later because apparently kids told me too much, so I had a letter saying I wasn't gonna be able to go places anymore, but we got around that. The second place we went to was Clarinda. It was depressing. You go down a road, it's on the same property as a prison. They have the prison food. There were holes in the wall. We had a kid there that even the CEO asked if he was okay. He was that off. He was one of our kids. And there was another kid there who had been taken in ankle and wrist shackles all the way from Portland, Oregon to Clarinda, Iowa. And his parents had signed consents for me to talk to him. They moved him the day before I got there. And they told him it was because the senator was asking about him and his case was too hot, so he got sent back home. I didn't think to ask questions there, and I learned more later. Like, there weren't any tables. There wasn't a cafeteria. I forgot to ask, where's the cafeteria? Those children were eating off of the floor. There were no tables and chairs for them to eat that prison food. Often the showers didn't work. But that place didn't look nearly as bad as when I got on the plane and I went to Illinois. I walked into this facility. Again, we'd had regulators who had been there. It was, they weren't expecting me. They had a different executive director than what we had on file, and within 90 seconds of being in the building, I saw an inappropriate restraint. This young girl, this was a program primarily kids with developmental disabilities, reached for a piece of fruit without asking for permission, and two people came at her and pinned her up against the wall. As we toured, there were no sheets on the beds. They told me they had an outbreak of ringworm. There was garbage on the floor. There were locked doors. I kept asking to see what was behind the locked doors. One of the kids I was there to see, they couldn't find. It was terrible. The classrooms, the teachers were yelling at the kids. They were getting no instruction, and one of the classrooms had a child who was zipped from toe to chin in a body sock. So there's no arms or legs. She was just zipped up by herself. If there was a fire, there's no way she could have gotten out. It was awful. My folks went after that. They repainted, they bought new furniture, and they said that I was making it up. Months later, I visited them again in Iowa, not in Iowa, in Michigan. And right the night before we left, I had contacted the prior month, the Joint Commission, to report what I saw at Northern Illinois Academy. And they took their CMS number away and declared immediate jeopardy at that program. But they still operated because states were paying with state general funds, not Medicaid funds. And that's how they were escaping all of the medical oversight. They were still operating. And they got that letter the night before I went. So the CEO was really angry with me. I was concerned about restraints. And we were at Lakeside Academy and talked with him about their restraints were gonna kill a kid. It was like, I know you're telling me what your policies say, but that's not what's happening. Over and over again, from all these kids, they say the same thing, they don't know each other. And 6 weeks later, Cornelius Frederick was killed. About from this distance to that wall from where I was sitting and had that conversation, he threw a sandwich and was taken down by 5 people. And we know, I was shown in my deposition, a video of him having the same restraint a month earlier, and the kids were not alarmed. These places are dangerous, and more kids will die immediately and in the long term. And as hard as we work in the state legislature, in some states, to regulate these programs, They have so much money. They masquerade as small nonprofits, but those are shell corporations that all go up to the big Squel in the sky or the big UHS in the sky, and they don't want you to know that they are all the same program. And they will pick up the kids just like they did after Cornelius. They'll close that facility, take all the other kids with them to another program, and make more money off of their bodies. And those kids can't get out. Somehow they're the bad ones. They're the broken ones. And these executives keep making all of this money. They can get around the regulations because they aren't held personally responsible. The only way to make it stop is to hit their bottom line. And that's what happened with Squel. We'll hear more about that later. They're now Vivint. And that's partly because they had to close a bunch of their programs. Was it because a kid died? No. Was it because kids were eating off of the floor? No. Was it because of immediate jeopardy? No. It's because California pulled all its kids out after we started collaborating on what terrible places these were. They couldn't afford to keep them open. It's that bottom line. And I'll close because there's two other folks that are going to talk, but these cases are hard. When you go in, you have to always ask the next question. They are not going to tell you what is true. You have to ask literally, what is behind that door? You have to ask literally, why is that child sitting over there against the wall? And you have to keep asking and keep asking. You have to remember that while you can't access the child abuse reports because they're confidential, you can get the licensing records. The licensing records will have the restraint and the solitary confinement records within them. Those are public record. You can access all of those. Any incident reports that are going to the state, the contracts for those programs, all of that is there. And when you do these things, it is what makes a difference. Because as a legislator, or if I were working at the Department of Human Services, we're all advised by our Department of Justice, who is concerned about litigation. What they are afraid of is a business suing the state for their license being inappropriately taken away. And I keep saying, why aren't we afraid of being sued because a kid has died or their life has been destroyed? Until they start to see what that costs, that assessment of risk from the Departments of Justice is not going to shift. And in my own state today, there was a great example of this. We had a teacher who was grooming kids for sexual abuse, middle school kids. He was reported. The state licensing entity investigated, found that it happened. They suspended him for 2 months over the summer, and the school district just moved him to an elementary school instead of a middle school. Earlier this week, 2 kids filed suit against the school district. He got fired today. The only way that kid was out there is because some attorneys listened to these kids and told them an apology isn't enough, you deserve justice, and you shouldn't feel guilty about it, because it's not the money, it's not the kids themselves getting the money, which is fine. It is the only way to cut the head off of this monster. And if you don't do that, they'll just keep growing more heads, and it'll be more decades and more lives that are just completely destroyed. So I'm so glad you all took the time to be here today. I hope you look at the resources that are available out there, because once you see it, you cannot look away. These kids are depending on those of us that have seen it. We can't quit, and thank you to all of you that put the time and effort and attention to really lifting up the voices of victims and making sure that justice is found. Thank you.
Senator, I'd also like to thank you for reminding us all what a true servant of the public looks like. We don't see that often. Our next guest, as I said, I'd never met him before MTMP. We talked on the phone a few times, and I heard there's this attorney doing this crazy thing with religious schools, and I had to find out about it. We talked on the phone once a couple months ago. I said, you have to speak. We need to tell other attorneys what you're doing so they can copy this. It may hurt your practice a little bit, but we need other attorneys to do what he is doing. A true gladiator in this space and an innovator in this space. I'd like to welcome to the stage Brian Kim.
Doing crazy things with religious groups is a description that I've never heard before, but I kind of like it. First and foremost, thanks to Senator and folks from Unsilenced. These cases, which are extremely difficult to handle, From an emotional standpoint and a legal standpoint, they would not exist if survivors didn't come forward. Usually it only takes one to get it going, so thanks for all you're doing to make that easier. I was a former sex crimes prosecutor before I started doing civil work. And I got a call in 2015 from a buddy in the senator's home state of Oregon, asking me to come out and talk to a 19-year-old kid who was in jail, who was talking about abuse at a Seventh-day Adventist affiliated therapeutic boarding school down in West Virginia. And what he had described to me, my buddy out in Oregon, I did not think could ever possibly be real, because the abuses that he was talking about were so horrific that I could not believe a human being could subject any other person, let alone a child, to the things that were happening under the guise of mental health treatment and God and religion, which is a scary thought. So I flew out to Portland, met with this really smart, intelligent 19-year-old kid who was adopted into a Seventh-day Adventist family. Had some acting out issues, but probably not much more than me as a high school kid. And then, against his will, sent down to two schools. One, Advent Home in Tennessee, and then transferred to a place called Miracle Meadows in Salem, West Virginia. And just to tell you where a lot of these faith-based therapeutic boarding schools are, they are in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they are so secluded, and that's on purpose, so that nobody can hear kids scream. If a kid tries to escape, they can't, because there's nowhere to go. And they are left with no family. They are monitored in terms of any phone calls or letters, such that if something is going home that they don't approve of, they're not going to allow it to go home. And I think they had like one parent visit every quarter. And by that point, the kids were just so traumatized. And the type of abuses that were happening and are happening at these faith-based schools, and this is the scary thing about it, it's not like, oh, you have a couple of bad eggs at a school. This is systematic. So these kids are, found, their parents may be at their wits' end because they're acting out, and their parents may not think that they're doing anything inappropriate by sending them to these schools, because as Megan the Senator talked about, what's being represented to the public is so far from the horrific reality of what's happening behind closed doors. But the types of abuses that he told me about were these kids were being raped by staff members, being forced to act sexually on kids in their dorm, and there were kids that aged from age 6 to 18 that were being sent down to school. And the 6-year-olds were forced to live in a dorm with the 18-year-olds and adult staff members. They were thrown into what were called quarantine rooms, which were solitary confinement rooms, cinder block with no windows, no bed, stripped naked with a pot, literally a coffee pot, to urinate and defecate in for months at a time, writing biblical verses. They had their meals. They were given very little food. They were required to do forced labor in the fields. They really weren't schooled at all. And it was just the most horrific abuse I ever heard. So I just asked him, do you have anybody to substantiate this? And he said, yeah. So he put me in touch with somebody else, and we went down to the school, decided, these kids were telling the truth. There was no doubt about it. And these kids, just so you understand, because I want you to know the reality of handling these cases. I mean, Meg touched on it a little bit, but these kids, and I say kids, I also mean the adults who were the kids that were abused. They don't trust anybody. So you're a lawyer that's saying, hey, I'm gonna help you potentially get money at the end of the day. Like, they are not going to trust you at first. So you have to have people that are hardcore trauma-informed to work with these folks, and you cannot lie to them. You have to be brutally blunt about the process. Also tell them that you're gonna be there to support them, that it's gonna be safe, but you have to be able to gain their trust throughout this process, because they are not going to trust you at all when you start this. So we filed suit against this Miracle Meadows on behalf, I guess at the time it was only two kids, and they were 19, 20 years old. Turned into a lot more than that. But I know I'm limited time. I want Tommy to have plenty of time to talk as well. I just want to talk about some practical aspects of handling these cases, especially on the religious aspect of things. So typically you have this low-level church or school, therapeutic boarding school, that's affiliated with some religious group. So like Agape was, I forget who Agape was affiliated with, but Seventh-day Adventist school or Miracle Meadows was affiliated with Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we did our due diligence and got historical documents before we filed suit, and we thought we had a pretty good claim to keep the national church in the case, even though everything that they said was, these are completely autonomous institutions, which is a total lie from a couple different levels. But one of the things that we did in those cases, and you all have to do if you get a religious therapeutic boarding school or any of these religious affiliated places, is get their tax documents, because the national church will file a group exemption. And if those schools are listed on the group exemption, they're representing to the federal government that the national church exercises sufficient control and has the right to make changes about how things are going at the lower level school. So, and that goes for every link above the chain. So you typically have the national church. In the Seventh-day Adventists, you have what are called unions, which are kind of like dioceses, regional dioceses, and then you have the lower level church and the school. And if you get those tax documents, you can literally go up the chain and establish that control. And there's no way around it. I mean, literally the federal government puts out a pamphlet that says both entities have to represent that the parent organization exercises significant control over the lower level if you have this group exemption. Secondly, how much time we got?
The old time you need.
Okay. Just from a pleading standpoint, I would say that the initial pleading is the most important part of handling these faith-based cases. And that's from a multitude of levels, but especially from an insurance standpoint. So you think about what's happening in these schools, faith-based or otherwise. You have medical neglect and medical malpractice, which is one claim. You have educational neglect, which is another claim. You have physical abuse. You have sexual abuse. You have emotional abuse. You have spiritual abuse, which is, spirituality is something that we use to comfort ourselves, right? And when these kids are sent down to these schools and told that this is under the guise of religion and God, and they're getting raped and beaten at the end of the day, it strips them of any connection to God and spirituality, which I don't know of something that is more significant of an impact on a child. But you have all those different abuses that are happening, and forced labor. So a lot of these kids are forced to do labor instead of going to class, literally reaping fields and cleaning things up. So you have all these different angles that need to be pled the correct way when you have these complaints. And the last practical thing I'll say with regards to handling these cases, I'll let Tommy take over. So you will get a significant amount of cases that are going to be, you think are beyond the statute, right? So you get a 40, 50-year-old. Most of these schools are located purposefully in states that have archaic statute of limitations. There's been a lot of change in the past couple of years in that regard, but it's still, you still have a lot of states that have these archaic statute of limitations. One of the arguments that we use to get around that is you have these kids that are being sent to a school. They're being told that it's medically necessary for them to go there to get better. And in the faith-based schools, they're being told that it's necessary from a spiritual standpoint that you have to undergo what you're undergoing to be connected to God again, right? To be saved and be right. And you get these defendants that come in, so you have somebody who's technically 20 years beyond the statute. You have a defendant that comes in and says, these kids are beyond the statute. Like, how are they filing these lawsuits? These are 20 years old and we have a 3-year statute. Well, these are the same institutions that are telling these kids what we're doing is medically necessary and spiritually necessary for you to get better. So how is a kid supposed to connect that with tortious conduct that then is connected to the causal factor for their injuries today? It's impossible. It's impossible. So they can't get both sides of that, right? They can't say it's medically and spiritually necessary, but it's also tortious conduct. So what we've been doing is, in the cases that are beyond the statute, is saying that exactly that to courts. It's working a lot, and especially with regards to if you have medical treatment that, you know, most of these kids can't afford any medical treatment at all, therapy and things of that nature. So if that's lacking, that's actually not good for the health, but good for the argument with regards to the statute. But we built a very, what we think, a really good blueprint to ensure that all of these folks that have a hand in these kids being abused as badly as they've been abused are held accountable at the end of the day. And I will say, like, Meg and the Senator's work has been incredible. Caleb, Tommy, myself, like, if you want to do these cases, you want help, you want briefings, you want things of that nature, let's work together to get it done, because these places should be outlawed, yet they're still operating with the approval of state government and religious organizations and things of that nature, because they make a lot of money. That's what it is at the end of the day. Miracle Meadows parents were paying $35,000 for their kids to go there every year, yet they're being horrifically abused. So again, I really appreciate being here, and if we can help at all with regards to anything that you guys need to litigate these cases, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks.
Thanks, sir. Obviously, one of our specialties at 11th Antonio Rafferty at NTMP is building coalitions. And so many of those coalitions, as you heard at the luncheon and throughout the program, start with a phone call, I think I have something, or somebody's crazy idea. And when Pap and I launched the Exploited Teen Project, we wanted the best and the brightest from the very beginning. When we were initially starting off, one of the first phone calls I made was to the gentleman that I'm fixed to introduce. I didn't know him from Adam, and he didn't know me from Adam. And we talked, I think, an hour and a half that first conversation. He is truly one of the pioneers in this space. I'm glad to call him a partner on these cases. He's extremely humble, which is a problem I never had. And I think we're honored to have him on this panel. We're honored to have him speak. And I think Jeremy Knowles was also supposed to be here today. Is another partner of ours from Alabama. Tommy and Jeremy went to the University of Alabama School of Law, as I did, Roll Tide. And together we've tackled this, and we hope you'll join us. Welcome, Tommy, to the stand.
I could do that. This is kind of video.
If any of you are familiar with that rivalry, that'd be a War Eagle. But let's not get into that. Let me get to this to start. Your volume.
We're back now with our NBC News investigation into the shocking death of a 16-year-old at a youth facility run by a company we've investigated before for past violations. We want to warn you, some of the video you're about to see is disturbing. Here's Kate Snow.
You're looking at video of 16-year-old Cornelius Frederick having lunch at Lakeside Academy, a home for at-risk youth in Kalamazoo, Michigan. There's no audio, but Cornelius is seen throwing food. 2 staff members intervene, but when Cornelius throws another item, he's pushed down. 2 men become 3, then 6 on top of him. After at least 10 minutes of restraint, Cornelius is lifted up, limp, and then watch what happens. Staff members, including a nurse, stand around for another 12 minutes. Then the nurse calls 911.
She said he was in a restraint and now he's unresponsive.
2 days later, Cornelius was dead.
That's the case Senator Gelser Bloom was talking about, and these cases are everywhere. These cases are in your backyard, like you heard Pat talk about this morning with Pears. They're within 100 yards, 100 miles of your home, and there's horrible abuse going on in these facilities. You've heard that all day about what happened to Paris. You've heard from these strong survivors. You've heard from Meg as to what they've had to go through in these facilities, and it is absolutely horrific. I currently have about 12 cases. They range from broken arms, sexual assaults, gang rape, forced isolation cases, just horrible things. The things that go on in these facilities, you can't make up how bad it is. If you think of something that is horrific, it has probably gone on in these facilities, and these survivors here can tell you about what's going on, and we are trying to stop it. And as has been the consistent statement up here, is litigation. Litigation is what is going to bring change to this industry. It's not gonna be, no offense, it's not gonna be the legislation, because in Alabama, there is good legislation when it comes to residential treatment facilities, and there is zero oversight. Zero oversight. I'm gonna show you some clips of, this is one of our clients, 16-year-old girl in Owens Crossroads, another Squel facility. You'll hear a lot about Squel. You heard the senator talking about it. They're based in Alabama, strangely enough, but they had facilities nationwide until they changed their name several times, and now have been bought out and restructured and changed their names, and are still running the same facilities with the same people operating them. But this, our client here, she had been treated so horribly in this facility by staff for weeks. And DHR, that's our child welfare agency in Alabama, DHR, like your DHS or whatever it is in your state. They had come out to this facility a few weeks before because they received complaints about how bad the clients, they call them, at these places were being treated, and they didn't do a damn thing. And here's what happened to our client, because she was so worried, she called 911, called advocacy groups, but this is the day she called 911. You're gonna see a worker over here to the left, bottom left of your screen later, maybe middle left, just sitting there eating her chips, going about her day, not trying to intervene here. Now they're defending this, claiming it's a medical malpractice case, that this was a restraint because of her behavior, when all she was doing, she opened that door, and that employee came through, slammed her to the ground. Then she started fighting back, and then the other residents came over there to beat the hell out of her, bruising and breaking ribs, broke her jaw. And that is one of the difficulties in these cases. They tried to claim it was a med mal case. In that situation, we're currently litigating that before the Alabama Supreme Court. And I'll tell you about another one that we had success on the same issue. But it's just not a medical malpractice. Some of you handle those claims, I'm sure. That's not a medical, it's not a restraint. She wasn't endangering herself, wasn't endangering others, and she simply gets attacked. And it's not a medical injury to get beat in the jaw, get beat in your ribs. Let me go to the next one. This is Hunter Carter. He was also at a Squel facility, one of the worst facilities I've ever seen. This facility had broken windows all throughout with urine, blood, feces smeared on the walls, rodents everywhere. The children lived on concrete beds with no furniture in their rooms. The gym had rodent infestation, just a horrible place. And it was a true culture of violence in this facility and many others that I've seen. And I don't know what creates that, but it is there. And this child, within 10 days, received beatings from staff and other residents so bad that he attempted to kill himself. And thankfully, that was unsuccessful, so he escaped that house of horrors, and he's out and doing well now. This is another one of our cases, Connor Bennett. Connor was being sexually abused by other residents in a facility relentlessly. He would complain to his higher-ups at the facility and employees. They didn't help him. He screamed out for help. They didn't help him. He was taken for treatment as a result of some of the injuries he received from a rape. They left him in the facility. Now I'll tell you what happens here in this piece.
Can you tell me about Connor Bennett, who is your latest client?
He was 15 years old when he was placed in Squel, and he had developed some behavioral problems, and his family, they needed to get him help. He was there for approximately 5 or 6 months. He was bullied incessantly. Like all the other residents that were there, he was treated poorly by staff. There was physical abuse by staff. Connor started being sexually abused by another resident at the facility. In April, he couldn't handle it anymore, and he hung himself in his room. Just a horrific case, and it got a lot of media attention across the country. And we do try to get media attention in these cases, and here's some headlines from it, because these cases need to be on the radar across the country. They get press, they get national press, they get local press. We filed one a couple weeks ago, and it got, how many outlets covered it?
283.
283 across the country, so it needs to be top of mind. And I think also with it being top of mind for survivors, it may encourage them to come forward, seeing other people getting help. Maybe they'll want to come to hopefully our firm to get help. Money, the big money. Everybody's talking about money. Pat was talking about Wall Street this morning. It's true. It's true. We've got UHS is one of the biggest providers of healthcare in the country. They're big in this space. Multi-billion-dollar company. We've got Acadia, multi-billion-dollar company. Devereaux, huge. Squel, not as big as they were now, but they're still well insured. And that's the thing in these cases, they're well funded, well insured, the money is there to pursue these cases. But here's a little clip from Jay Ripley. He's the founder of Squel, the one you've heard so much about today, and about the way he likes to make profits.
And the reason that we can make that profit is if you control your staffing levels. So you have to have enough staffing to have an excellent program, but you can't have too much staffing to eat up your profit.
The folks dealing with them on a day-to-day basis aren't being trained properly. They're not being vetted properly. They're not being paid enough. In fact, Squel has been known to cut staff to increase their profits. It's a for-profit business. That's what they're about. Profit, profit, profit. Now, these are just a few of our cases. I think I've got around a dozen pending right now, and several dozens in the past. And one common thing in these cases, they're all heartbreaking. You've heard about that throughout the day since this morning. But also they're high value cases. These are lucrative cases, and every one of you in this room needs to be trying to get these cases. Back, I think 9 months ago, when Caleb called me asking if we'd be willing to partner up with 11 Tap and Tony, I'm like, hell yeah. I said, we jumped in head first because I knew I would have the opportunity to come to events like this and speak at MTMP about this issue to bring attention to it. I knew it would bring a network of lawyers, expand the network of lawyers who would be interested in handling these cases. I knew things would happen like them bringing in Paris Hilton this morning to talk about this issue, to bring it to the forefront, to bring people like Meg in and Unsilence, who from the survivor standpoint, the advocacy they're doing is amazing. To bring her in, to bring the senator from Oregon, who is a good friend of mine, by the way. I had the chance to go up and meet her a few months ago. The things she is doing in Oregon are amazing. And then Guru over here, Brian Kent, I've seen him over the years at National Crime Victim Bar Association events, and he's always good, and I really want to discuss those cases. Would have opportunities like that, would have opportunities to have Cap Antonio and Caleb here on the cover of this magazine featuring this very project. And Caleb will be around for autographs later on. He bought a stack of those, but, so what this day is about is opportunity. It's a unique opportunity. You all should be the ones getting these cases before someone else does. The reason it's unique, it's a unique opportunity, not just an opportunity, is because many of the other cases here at MTMP, you're spending a lot of money on them to acquire them, to get them, to hire PR firms to try to get the cases, hire case acquisition firms to try to get the cases. You can get these cases for free. You can get them for free or practically no cost. Put something on your website. You can use our template. You can use Caleb's template. I think if you Google right now, troubled teen industry lawyer, there are about 5 or 10 marketing in that space in the country, and we're 2 of those. But it's something you can do. It's very little money spent on it. I know you've got the PFAS and the Camp Lejeune and everything else, so why not put troubled teens on there? Something on social media, write an article, anything like that, to try to get these cases. We are willing to do anything we can to help y'all get these cases. Or if you get a case, we're willing to advise y'all. We've got the template down. I've been doing this for years. Happy to provide lawsuits, documents, advise you, anything to bring these cases. If you don't want to handle cases at all, give us a call and we'd be happy to look at that. And I think I've said everything I want to say, but again, I do want to thank everybody on this stage for bringing this to the forefront and helping talk about this. I'm here kind of to talk about, I mean, this is the forefront. You know, Pat was talking this morning about projects being started in TMP. It's still the beginning here. We're still, if you have ideas, if any of y'all have ideas to brainstorm how to get these cases, happy to talk to you. But we have some pretty good ideas. So I'd ask you to please take the opportunity today to come talk to us after this or tonight, dinner, or anywhere in the next couple of days, or give us a call. I've got my information up here if you would take a picture of it. Oh, and I'll show you this too, backing up. Got a little ahead of myself. This shows an example of how prevalent these facilities, wilderness programs, boot camps, therapeutic, boarding schools, whatever you want to call them, they're everywhere. They're in your neighborhood. They're down the street. They're everywhere. So that means these cases are everywhere. And again, high value cases. So please give us a call and I'll get this. If you take a picture of that, please feel free to call me. My cell number's on there, social media, email, anything else you need. And it has been a privilege to talk to y'all.
Thank you all for being here. I believe on ending in a positive note. In everybody's booklet that you got here is the MTMP magazine. And there's an article that I wrote that is a survey of the entire, a well-cited, if I do say so myself, article on the exploited teen industry. And I think it gives you a good launching point. Things to source, materials, GAO report, and different things. Please read that. It's free in all of your magazines. Contact any of us. We'll be along after the program. And please visit the Unsilenced booth in the exhibit hall. Thank you very much for being here.